today's vote in Alabama will only serve to harm kids. But Alabama's lawmakers and other legislators who are contemplating these discriminatory bills have been put on notice by the Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services that laws and policies preventing care that healthcare professionals recommend for transgender minors may violate the Constitution and federal law.
There is so much bullshit. So much bullshit everywhere. We're drowning in it.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Jazz Borganza here. Another episode of What's Next, your daily dose of common sense and facts. This is part 2 of a two-parter. Part 1, regarding Groomer-Gate, how we got here. And now part 2, the conclusion. Let's take a look. This comes out of Breitbart. How the Democrats transitioned. As Rachel Butford recalled recently in The Federalist, the younger Biden was once a sensible champion of middle-class values. But that was back in the 90s, when Biden himself was in his 50s. Since then, 2 things have happened. First, Biden got old. Enough said. Second, the intellectual world of the left has changed as trans emerged as an ideology, or as proponents would insist, a medical discovery. A look at Google's Nigrum Viewer, which tracks the usage of the words in books, illustrates this trend. We see that transgender has essentially zero usage up until the 90s. Meanwhile, the word transvestite has been steadily been in use since the 1950s. There's an enormous difference between two worlds. Transgenderism is the idea that some men are really women and vice versa, so need to be surgically reassigned. By contrast, transvestism is the reality that some people prefer donning gay apparel, as in case, for example, with drag queens, and of course, Drag Queen Story Hour. In progressive circles, transgenderism has taken off while transvestite has fallen off, and the fact is now often seen as a nasty word. The worldview of today's libertarian left, much more preoccupied with sex than anything else, the same Google Nigrum Viewer shows us, for example, that while mentioning the transgender has soared in recent decades, mentioning class struggle have plummeted. In other words, the new liberalist sexual agenda has now trumps the old left economic agenda. For his part, Dementia Boy has never been thought of as a leader of any kind of whatsoever. He has preferred to be the exact middle of any group he's been in, going with the flow, embracing predominant thoughts of his own, and that's a big reason why he's enjoyed such a long and pathetic career. So, of course, Biden finds himself transitioning or transgenderism just as he changed on abortion. My view of the new Democratic reality during his quest for the party's 2020 nomination, candidate Biden tweeted, "Let's be clear, transgender equality is the civil rights issue of our time." Bullshit. There is no room for compromise when it comes to basic human rights. Yes, you know, those wonderful basic human rights that are being abused and destroyed in China, you know, the Muslim Uyghurs and, of course, Chinese Christians. But let's not talk about that because that's Disney's sugar daddy. Since January 20th, 21, the 46th president, of course, who was installed, has been surrounded by people, he, she, they, who have kept him on a narrow, if not necessarily straight path. For instance, Dementia established a White House Gender Policy Council. Let's just make it up as we go along, which issues reliable left-leaning position papers calling for just on March 8th, advanced equality for trans Americans. For the most part, the MSM has been fully supportive of this agenda. We're not cheerleading for it, and yet occasionally peeps of concerns can be heard. For instance, on April 5th, Washington Post headline, "Teachers who mention sexuality are grooming kids," conservatives say. The piece quotes Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies for the right-leaning American Enterprise Institute, saying that conservative parents feel that like we're living in a bizarro universe. Out of this parental concern came fear that the left has insufficiently protective of, or maybe even support of, sexual grooming, hence the new phrase, Groomer-Gate. Yet, the MSM, the progressive left, usually gets most inked. Therefore, the same Post piece also quoted Christine Soyan Harley, CEO of a group called SICUS, Sex Ed for Social Change, who assured readers that the progressive gender education just gives students the ability to understand difference of families. However, if we take a closer look at Sikhs, we see that there is so much of an understanding that as outright propaganda. For instance, the About Us page tells us that Sikhs advance comprehensive sexuality education means building a foundation for a long-term cultural shift that will positively impact all levels of society. There's nothing positive. There's nothing positive about this, particularly issues of gender and racial equity, sexuality, sexual and reproductive health, consent, personal safety, and autonomy. Furthermore, Sikhs commits to working to dismantle the systems of power and oppression which perpetuate disparate sexual reproductive health outcomes that incubate stigma and shame around sex and sexuality across the intersections of age, race, size, gender identity, expression, class, sexual orientation, and ability. So let's just make up all this shit as we go along, put it in one big sentence, and of course to the left, it sounds wonderful. Sikhs is one of many similar-minded groups that have achieved influence and sometimes homogeny in education and the culture. Excuse me. Swept up in the same aggressive spirit. Some U.S. states have gone even further than the Biden administration. One tweeter noted recently that Chinese COOF tests in New York give the test taker a variety of self-identification options, including genderqueer. Yes, because taking the COOF test, you get your choice of flavors. One presumes that genderqueer is a valid scientific category needed for medical knowledge, so of course we should trust the science. Yes, remember Lord Farquhar? This fluid environment. The newest justice on the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, can't or maybe doesn't care about defining a woman. March 23rd, non-answer to a question posed by Senator Marsha Blackburn inspired Ted Cruz to go off, "What is a woman?" didn't used to be a trick question. For all that recorded history, people have known what a woman is. But according to Judge Jackson, is such a fellow traveler with the radical left that she cannot acknowledge common sense. Jackson's confirmation notwithstanding, it seems clear that the forces of common sense are gaining the upper hand. Indeed, the backlashing of normalcy is bolstered by such popular tweets, resources such as Peachy Keen, Libs of TikTok, now joined by the wicked parody who gave us critical grooming theory. Nice. If you're offended by the term groomer, it means you've been groomed. Seek help. Libs of TikTok, the mental gymnastics to try to justify teaching 5-year-old kids about sex. DeSantis broke these teachers. It's epic. Let's take a listen.
The Don't Say Gay bill is actually also the Don't Say Straight bill.
Here's a section if you wanted to pause and screenshot.
Because of Florida's choice to keep things vague, so there's a big umbrella of which to discriminate, they also included straight people. So these are the straight things that you won't be able to talk about in Florida schools when this is enacted. Gender signs need to be taken off all of the bathroom doors. You cannot line up kids in girl rows and boy rows. You cannot talk about traditional families or a family with a man and a woman because that's heterosexuality. And I don't want y'all to talk about that in school. You won't be able to celebrate Mother's Day or Father's Day in school. You won't be able to celebrate Christmas in school. I don't know what orientation the Immaculate Conception was, but I don't want my child subjected to that. What other examples of heterosexuality prevalent in K through 3rd grade can y'all come up with? Let me know in the comments.
So the pro-traditional family right can expect a lot more of that sort of onslaught. Not just conspiracy theory, but homophobe, transphobe, McCarthyite, QAnon, anything else that they can just pull out of their ass can be heaved into the air. And yet, the blazing away in defense of the trans sex issue should remind us that the progressive left also blazes away in the defense of critical racist theory. It would, in fact, be deeply unfair to accuse all Democrats of being groomers, just as it's deeply unfair for Democrats to say that Republican legislation, in the case of Florida, will kill kids. In such situations, it's wise to remember that saying from a World War II attribute to an unknown but well-spoken U.S. bomber pilot, the flak is heaviest when you're over the target. My thoughts. This was part 2, longer part 2, but you can see where all this came from. The fact of the matter is that the leftists, knuckleheads, douchebags in the media, in politics, in education have no problem going scorched earth on those of us who believe in traditional families. Mom, dad, kids, the nuclear family, as it was coined in the 80s during the Reagan era. But they will not stop. And those of us on the right with common sense, facts, critical thinking, common knowledge, have got to continue to fight on, continue to smack them in the face. Because it's great that you have a DeSantis. It's great that you have a governor like Ivey in Alabama. But more needs to be done. And it shouldn't take legislative policies for common sense practice. But at the end of the day, it's all propaganda bullshit. And with that being said, I'm Josh Berganzo. This is What's Next. Want to see more just like this? Please leave a comment below. Like it, share it, subscribe to it. And we'll catch you guys again on the next one. Peace.